Welcome to the Redbird Report, your destination for the latest on the St. Louis Cardinals. Here are your hosts, BK and Tebow.
All right, let's address the obvious. It's not going well. It's not a good start to the second half for the St. Louis Cardinals. It's good to be back with you guys. That's Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. Appreciate you tuning in to the Redbird Report. Last time that we talked, I said, hey, a week from now, we will be back to give you our first half superlatives, MVP, all that stuff. We didn't have a show last week. T-Bone was on vacation. Blame him. That's on him, not on me. I
guess BK didn't know that, like literally 30 minutes before we went on air.
Yeah, that's on me. I do apologize for getting that wrong.
I missed the vacation days. Things weren't falling apart.
We could have reacted to Jordan Walker winning the home run derby. We could have reacted to the first half of the season, which all things considered went really well for the Cardinals. Instead, we're here to react to them losing 4 of their last 5 games. And the one win was a 1-0 victory against the LA Angels. That being said, T-Bone, there was something positive that came from that, and I do want to discuss that to begin the show today. Hunter Dobbins was awesome. 6 scoreless innings against, yes, albeit a bad offense, the same bad offense, though, that scored 5 the previous day against Matthew Liberatore to kick things off against the Cardinals. Dobbins is staying around. So today, we're recording this on Thursday afternoon. We have not yet seen how things go against the Arizona Diamondbacks, so if you're listening to this afterwards, that's why we're not discussing that particular game. But they decided to keep Hunter Dobbins here for an extra day. And Jeff Jones of the Belleville News-Democrat tweeted out prior to the game on Thursday that the Cardinals have an explanation for this. Ollie Marmol says that the Cardinals are, quote, going to see if we can hold on to Dobbins until he throws again, until we can't. Jeff Jones adding that it sounds as though the Cardinals would like to see Dobbins again as a starter, but the Cardinals were being a bit cagey about it. No other starters will be in the bullpen over the next 2 days. So that's where we're at with the Cardinals right now. He also added, Jeff Jones did, that the Cardinals evidently have been lining this up as the plan for Dobbins for quite a while. This time of the year is obviously a factor. Some of that is certainly in play. It's a day-to-day situation. Okay. Let's start a little big picture. That's kind of laying the framework of where we're at right now with the Cardinals and their rotation. Dobbins sticks around. He's going to potentially be a part of the rotation, kind of similar to what they did last year with Michael McGreevy in the second half. What does this mean? What is the plan in your estimation, both with Dobbins and how they're going to set this rotation up?
It seems to me as if they're starting to make a shift away from Matthew Liberatore. That's what this screams to me, because the whole no starters coming out of the bullpen for the next 2 days. All right, well, that would be right around the time I would think Libby was getting ready to do his next bullpen, right? When a starter, typically they start, they go about a day or two with rest, and then they go have a bullpen session with Dusty Blake. That's kind of what that felt like to me, of a slow transition away from Matthew Liberatore. Now, maybe they have him start his next time through, and they just kind of stick with this 6-man rotation for one more turn through, and then maybe they start that shift, because then it kind of allows for the extra rest that they love with the starters. But this, to me, is the first sign of, all right, we're getting ready to make the change on Dobbins to Libby, or at least if we trade Dustin May, we have Dobbins up here, and then it will become a conversation of Quinn Matthews versus Matthew Liberatore. But to me, this is clearly, they believe that they have another starter here that can replace Matthew Liberatore and Hunter Dobbins. It's just a matter of how quickly do they want to switch off of Matthew Liberatore.
Man, I don't know if I buy into that or not. It does make a lot of sense, though, with the statement of over the next 2 days, we're not going to have any starters coming out of the bullpen. Well, if it's 2 days, that's the time frame here. There's a guy in particular who makes sense in the bullpen, who would fit that lefty lane that they're lacking right now, who's been terrible as a starter for the better part of the last calendar year, who would be available 3 days from now coming out of the bullpen. So if that's the plan, the schedule all lines up. Like, if we're reading breadcrumbs here, it ain't hard to figure out who that guy would be. I just wonder if they're saying, hey, we're going to keep all of our options open. You know, maybe it's Liberatore that bumps back to the bullpen. Maybe they trade Dustin May 3 days from now. Maybe they look at dealing Andre Palante or Kyle Leahy, or they just stick with the 6-man rotation and they flip over a couple of guys from their bullpen. Maybe Bryson Motts is going to be recalled within the next 24 to 48 hours, and he's the guy that provides the length necessary for them coming out of the bullpen. I just don't know. I have not had a very good read lately on what they do with their pitching. I feel like for the first 70-ish games of the season, we were right in line, lockstep with what the Cardinals were planning to do. All of it made a lot of sense. It was all very practical, and we were right in line with their decisions. And then over the last 20 games or so, that's completely shifted in how they've gone about things, what they've prioritized, and who they've called up and when. And so now I don't feel like I have that same understanding of the way that they're operating. I think this one makes sense with Dobbins. I like that they're keeping him here. What the plan is around Hunter Dobbins is the part that I don't seem to have a great grasp on right now.
I think they maybe don't know what they're going to do with him just yet.
It's possible.
I think you don't send him down because then you start the 15-day ticker of he's got to be down there for 15 days unless there's an injury. Well, you can't plan on that. So I think this is all right, we know we want him to start the next time through. The question is, do we want him to start in place of Matthew Liberatore, or do we want to start with everybody, right? And then again, even with Dustin May, I'm sure they are more open now because of the way they've come out of the second half and how honestly they were playing going into the All-Star break, more open to trading Dustin May. But the question is, are they going to get the value they want for Dustin May? Their whole starting pitching is, I think, probably going to be up in the air until August 3rd, which is the deadline. So I think they have some ideas, but the reason that this seems so confusing isn't because I think we are partially not in lockstep with the Cardinals. I think it's because the Cardinals don't really know what the clear plan is yet because everything is so much up in the air with what their pitching plans are right now. And the big thing that's throwing a big loop in this is, A, they're kind of in the playoff race, even though they're not playing well. Everybody else that's in this race isn't playing well. And B, Matthew Liberatore's not pitching well. Because if Libby was pitching well, this is an easy conversation. Dobbins goes down, boom, we're done. We're not even having this conversation.
And see, there's so little on the 40-man right now at AAA.
Yeah.
That might change things too. If they had a bunch of different relief options down there right now that were all in the 40-man, and you could just play that Memphis shuttle back and forth, maybe they view it differently then too, because then you could just say, okay, over the next week, we'll make it work with the bullpen. We're light right now, but we can figure it out based upon 2 or 3 different moves that we can make here or there. I don't really have those moves. There's only really 2 guys that they could call up to help them in the bullpen right now, and that's Ryan Fernandez and Bryson Motts. I think those are the only 2 guys down on the 40-man that are currently in the system down at the AAA level. So I guess technically Tink Hintz as well, but he's not helping you. That guy, I think he's more likely to be DFA'd at this point than to come up to the big league level. So yeah, I think all of that is in play. And then the deadline is the big elephant in the room that's standing there in the corner right now looking at both of us. If you do send somebody down today, you can't call them back up for August the 3rd because we're 11 days away from that. So you then have a week between when the deadline actually exists and when you could call somebody up. And a lot of these deals get done in the days prior to the deadline. So you're really talking about more like 7 to 10 days prior to some kind of a move potentially taking place in the event that the Cardinals decide to sell. So all of this is in flux, and I do have a lot of empathy for the situation they're in right now. And because of all of that, I do like that they're deciding to make what is probably a difficult move to keep Hunter Dobbins here, because I do think they should be prioritizing getting him more opportunities. He is deserving of that chance the same way that Michael McGreevy a year ago was deserving of his opportunity in the rotation as well.
Yeah, I mean, every time he comes up here, he does exactly what McGreevy did a year ago, which is he comes up here, you watch him start, and you go, yeah, it's not overpowering stuff, but it gets the job done, and that's what's most important. Meanwhile, with Liberatore, sure, there's times where he strikes out 7, and then I look a little bit further to the left on the box score, and there's 5 runs attached to it. Okay, well, that's not doing the job. I mean, just look at what happened this turn through. Liberatore and Dobbins faced the exact same team, and though he gave up 5 runs early in that game, and you had plenty of time to come back in it, nobody felt like they were coming back in that game. It felt like the air was let out the balloon in the bottom of the first inning when they just tagged him and were hitting BP fastballs off of him. Meanwhile, for Dobbins, he went toe-to-toe with one of the most sought-after pitchers probably going to be on the market in Detmers this year. And I felt the whole way that maybe they wouldn't win that game, but I felt like they've got themselves a chance, and I never felt that way with Matthew Liberatore. So yeah, I'm glad that they're keeping him up here. I would understand if they keep Libby at least one more turn through the rotation. I think that's probably it, though. After that point, I'm probably done having the conversation of, oh, I understand it. No, it's time for Libby to go to the bullpen and see if you can kind of recoup some value with him in that spot.
if they decided, so we're talking about the deadline, how that plays into this as well. If they decided to trade one of their starting pitchers, who do you think is the most likely to be dealt at this year's trade deadline?
Dustin May.
You still think it's him?
I think so. I mean, I don't know that he carries much value, but he's the kind of like 3-4 back end starter that teams typically target at the deadline because it doesn't cost a whole lot. I know you've brought up on air on our show BK and Ferrario. I know you've brought up Leahy and Andre Palante as possibilities. I just can't think of the last guy that had a decent amount of control like those two have that are like true 4 or 5 starters. I just can't think of it at the deadline. Those feel like more of offseason moves, in my opinion. And honestly, you might be able to package those guys to go out and try and buy something too in the offseason. I just think it's Dustin May because I think someone could look at him like Philly, for example, is looking for a back-end starter. I could see where they call Hyman and say, hey, we want JoJo Romero, Dustin May. Can we make something work? And then they trade him that way. I think that's the only guy that I can see that is dealt.
Yeah, I think it's going to be May as well. That's most likely. The more we talk about it, the more I wonder if Matthew Liberatore could be that guy as well. The reason being, you could see another team that says, hey, we're going to buy in on this profile. We think we can unlock something that the Cardinals have failed to do. It's really just a blow-up inning, and if we can solve that for him, there's something more here. He had prospect pedigree. He's a guy that was a first-round draft pick. He's a lefty. He throws hard. Like all of the things that the Cardinals have bought into, you could see another team say, we are buying into that as well. And I don't know if that's necessarily a true contender. That might be a team that's on the fringe of the contention model right now. Maybe it's a team like the Padres that says, hey, we think we can buy into this. It's cheaper, it's cost controlled, and maybe there's something here for this year. Also for beyond, and we have no pitching right now. Like we've got to get something to give us some innings. So maybe that's the case. Or maybe it is a true contender that looks at Matthew Liberatore and says, yeah, that guy's not a starter. He stinks as a starting pitcher. We're not even going to try that. We're going to throw him back into the bullpen where he had a ton of success a couple of seasons ago with a like mid-3s ERA when he was coming out of the bullpen. And we're just going to go ahead and capitalize on that value for us. I wonder if there's a team out there that can convince themselves, because there's a lack of supply right now on the market. There's just not a whole lot of teams that view themselves as true and traditional sellers. Maybe Liberatore could have some value in this market. I don't know, but just kind of thinking about what their options could be. He's one that we haven't really discussed that I wonder if teams will view him as a legit asset at this year's deadline.
So if someone trades for Libby, do we agree it's probably to put him in the bullpen?
I don't know, because I've seen stuff like this. Like bad starters get traded at the deadline every year. And guys with worse numbers even than Matthew Liberatore have been traded for some kind of value. So it's possible somebody will look at it and say, yeah, he stinks, but we're going to change that. Like John Lester, when he got to the St. Louis Cardinals in 21, he had terrible numbers. I mean, terrible numbers. He got here and he served exactly the purpose that the Cardinals needed him to serve. Maybe if you're the Padres, I'll just use them as the example here. Maybe they say, we're going to tweak something with his arsenal. We're going to unlock something else. And then that's going to allow him to avoid the big inning, and he's going to be a 5 and dive guy for us. We're not going to try to push him. 5 innings, that's good. We've got a dynamite bullpen. They're going to come in and lock things down on the back end. So I would think that a contender would want him as a reliever, but I'm not as certain on that as you seem to be.
Yes, because I think if someone's trading for him, they're putting him in the bullpen. But, I mean, even as we're sitting here, I've started to buy a little bit more into your argument because, like, San Diego would make a ton of sense, right? 5 dives, see what we get. Problem is, I think a lot of these teams are looking at him and they're going, even if he goes 5 and dive, he gives up 5 runs most of these starts. So it doesn't even matter if we have a good bullpen. But the reason I had asked that question was because I think if teams are going to value him as a bullpen arm, I'm not letting them come in here and buy low on him. I would hang on to him. And I think this is why it's important for the Cardinals to start having this conversation about, are we going to put Matthew Liberatore in the pen? And what would that mean if we did? Could he get back to what he was 2 years ago? And the reason I say that is if they think he can get back to being an effective reliever, where that year I believe he was their highest leverage left-handed reliever out of their bullpen, I would plan on keeping him going through the ARB system. He's probably going to be like $4 million, bringing him back and going with Motts and him as our lefty relievers next year. And the reason I say that is maybe then you can get actual value for him if he pitches well out of the bullpen. And at next year's deadline, we're having this conversation about him as one of the most sought-after left-handed relievers on the market with 2 more years of control. That's why I would say I'm not selling low on Matthew Liberatore. if you're going to move him, I would say you probably should put him in the bullpen and try and go a full calendar year of him in the pen and see if you can recoup some of that value.
The Cardinals are in a really unique spot where they're not a true seller yet. That could change in the next week by the time that you hear from us again. And they have a lot of pitching. I know that sounds strange because we don't view them that way. They don't have a ton of great pitching, but they have a lot of options. And there are so many teams out there that need pitching right now that if they decide to do a true sell-off, the Cardinals, they could get some pretty interesting returns for some of these guys because of the lack of supply that's out there. So whether that's Liberatore or Leahy or Palante or May, I could make the argument for any and all of these guys to potentially go out the door. There are some really intriguing options for Chaim Bloom as we approach this year's deadline if they decide to go into a true sell mode. If they decide to buy, though, there is one team that seems to make the most sense as a potential match for the St. Louis Cardinals. We'll tell you who they are and what they could potentially provide for the Cardinals coming up next here on the Redbird Report. There's one team currently with a president of baseball operations by the name of John Mozeliak, who I believe could be the best fit for a potential trade candidate for the St. Louis Cardinals at this year's trade deadline. That team, of course, is the LA Angels. There's a new report that came out a little bit earlier today from Keith Law and from The Athletic overall that said the Angels, according to a person briefed on their pursuits, are interested in acquiring a young catcher. The Cubs were a team that they specifically brought up in this as a potential match to go out there and acquire one of Soriano or Detmers, the two controllable starting pitchers that the Angels have to offer at this year's deadline. They have a young prospect that's a catcher in their system right now, and he's starting the season he's at AAA right now, so he's not too far away from the big leagues. We know the Cardinals are another team with a ton of catching depth. Whether you want to go to the major league level and you would consider Ivan Herrera to be that guy. Jimmy Crooks is already at the major league level, and he's had some moments of intriguing power, at least at this level. Leo Bernal is now at the AAA level, and he seems to do a little bit of everything. You also have Rainiel Rodriguez at the AA level, so you're deep at that position, and I didn't mention Pedro Pages, who I don't think would be in a conversation like this, but in the event that you decided to sell Jimmy Crooks, just to use him as the example, you've got somebody ready to go that can be your backup at the major league level, so you're not screwed for the remainder of this season. T-Bone, if that is what the Angels are looking for, there is nobody in baseball that knows the Cardinals' catching prospects better than John Mozeliak, the guy that brought in most of these guys to the system. Do you think that could be a good match for one of Jose Soriano or Reed Detmers as the starting points to develop a package for one of those two guys that are controllable starters?
I think it does make sense. And I think it's because I think it makes sense for both the here and now, because it would be an upgrade for your rotation, and it would make sense for the years to come, right? I mean, Soriano's got, 2 more years of control after this year? I mean, you're talking about a guy that could be at the top end of that rotation when Doyle and Sanger are starting to make their debuts with the St. Louis Cardinals. So I think it makes some sense for them, and you mentioned the catching depth that they have. You can't sit on these guys forever. So it becomes a question of, do you want to wait to see what's available in the offseason, or do you want to try and make this move happen now? And while you're in a playoff race, Soriano would come in here and help you now if you decide to be a quote-unquote buyer. But like I said, I think this is more one of those of, this is buying now, but it makes a lot more sense because they're thinking bigger picture, and it's almost like they're starting their offseason early. In an offseason that's going to have a lot of questions surrounding it with the labor dispute that's coming up. But I think it makes sense, and I think Soriano is the kind of profile that they need to be looking for if they're looking for arms, which is he's got control, but he's also got like top 3 upside in a rotation. You know, I don't think they need to be in the market shopping for basically a version of Dustin May. They need to be in the market looking for guys that have legitimate upside, that are fairly young and have some control, and Soriano's that guy for me. I'm not as high on Detmers, but I know you can maybe talk me into him, but Soriano would be the one that I would target from the Angels.
They're the same age. They basically cost the same money. They have similar numbers. One of them is a righty. The other is a lefty. They're both really good. If the Cardinals decided that they prefer one over the other, like I'll defer to what they have internally on their models and stuff. I underestimated how good Detmers has been over the last few years, the underlying stuff on him is wildly impressive. He strikes a ton of dudes out. Basically, over the last 4 years, he's been more than a strikeout per inning as a starter for them. And he doesn't have any walk issues, where that is a bit of a problem, a bit of a concern with Jose Soriano, who does walk about a batter every other inning. And that's a little more than you'd probably prefer. And the strikeout numbers aren't quite as high as what they are for Reed Detmers. That being said, Soriano's really good and the stuff is legit. So if they decided to trade for him, I'd be all in on it. I would be curious to see who the Angels would prioritize out of the Cardinals' young catchers. Like, what would they want? Would they be looking for, let's say it's not Ivan Herrera, because I have no idea how John Mozeliak views Ivan Herrera. I will say this, the Cardinals didn't seem all that interested in having Ivan Herrera as an everyday catcher until Chaim Bloom took over. And then it was almost immediately announced, yeah, that guy's sticking behind the plate for the foreseeable future. So I would guess it's not Ivan Herrera that they'd be looking at here.
I agree.
It's probably one of Crooks or Leo Bernal. If they called and said, hey, that's the starting point for a conversation, you interested in that?
I am. I would say, and I would listen on either one of those guys, because I don't think either of them have a future here in St. Louis, because I think your future battering mate is Rodriguez, and then you can just figure out whoever that other guy is, whether that's Herrera, the one catcher you don't trade of those two, or you just go out and get a backup. But I would have interest in that. And I think Mo would target Bernal, would be my guess. Hasn't seen him fail at the major league level. We know that Bernal really profiles well as a good defensive catcher, and you're starting to see his bat come around. That screams a guy that Mo would target. So, yeah, I would be open to it. I don't know what else it would cost you, but I would be willing to put Bernal in this package and then put one of your pitching prospects that you have in the system. I'd be willing to package one of them in the deal to try and make this happen to add Soriano.
Yeah, I love the idea of it. Soriano makes a ton of sense. Detmers makes a lot of sense. They both are legit upgrades. Like, either one would come into the Cardinals rotation, and I'm curious if you agree with this. I think they would be the number one guy in the rotation right now.
Oh, 100%. Even if May's here, he's the number one.
Yeah, those guys are just both better than what you currently have in your rotation. And I don't know if that's long-term going to be the case. Like, you would hope that Liam Doyle can overtake one of them. And you hope that one of the other guys from your minor league system can overtake one of them. But if either Detmers or Soriano are your number 3 starter, you're feeling really good. And then the other thing that this allows you to do is, if too many of your guys from your minor league system become good and push their way to the major league system or major league level, guess what you can do? Trade somebody.
Yeah.
You can trade Soriano, or you could trade Detmers, or you could trade from your young surplus of major league pitching, which is what the Mariners appear to potentially be doing. At T-Bone, there was another piece. Again, this comes from The Athletic. It's a big update day on the trade deadline. They say that the Mariners are now open to trading not only Luis Castillo, but potentially Emerson Hancock, a right-handed starting pitcher, to acquire some kind of a righty bat at this year's trade deadline. Now, I don't know what kind of a bat they're looking for. I don't know who specifically they would be targeting, and I don't know what position they would be targeting, because when you look at their lineup right now, man, could they use some kind of a shortstop? I think that would probably be ideal for them. Somebody on the infield in general would probably be useful. But if you're floating out a prospect like Emerson Hancock, who's a former top 10 overall selection, has been quite good for them this year, even though the underlying numbers maybe aren't quite to that level, I would think they're going to try to get somebody that is a really, really good hitter. Do you think this is an Ivan Herrera conversation?
I think that's what Seattle would be targeting. I don't know that I would trade Herrera for him.
Okay.
Because of what you said with the underlying numbers. Look, he's been good this year, but he's basically a fastball pitcher, and everything on his Baseball Savant page says, yeah, this guy's not a 3.16 ERA guy. And if that's the case, I understand he's got a lot of control and pitching's valuable, and he is a former top 10 pick. I don't know that I want him as the centerpiece for an Ivan Herrera trade. And I would still continue to bet on Ivan Herrera and just keep him and see if I can find that pitching different ways, right? Like what we were just talking about with Soriano, because I don't think they're making 2 of these moves, right? I think it's one of, you go the path of maybe we're going towards the Angels and we're having the conversation with Mo about going after Soriano or Detmers. And maybe if we don't like what we hear there, then maybe you pivot and listen to what the Mariners are offering for a Herrera, for an Emerson Hancock. I would prefer to go the Angels route because I just don't think I would want him as the centerpiece.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Is there, like, I wonder if there is a deal to be made there with the Mariners. I don't know how they would view Ivan Herrera. That's part of this is like they've got their catcher in Cal Raleigh, even though he's been terrible this season, but he's their long-term catcher. They're not going to change anything there. And they also have a DH already who's basically Ivan Herrera in their lineup. So they would have to probably change their position with Herrera, where you're talking about him maybe as your first baseman of the future. Maybe like doing something with Josh Naylor and platooning there, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't know if they want to do that because they just gave Naylor like a 4 or 5 year deal, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, or you put him in the outfield. And now you're trying to see if Ivan Herrera long-term can be an outfielder for you. It just seems like a lot of moving parts here. That's why I led with the Angels side of things, because I think that seems far more likely, where that is the kind of thing that would make sense. Makes sense for the Angels if they're targeting a catcher to come and try to acquire one of Leo Bernal or Jimmy Crooks. Makes sense for the Cardinals to try to acquire a pitcher who could come in and immediately be, at worst, one of your top 2 starters, top 3 starters when you become a contender again with multiple years of club control. I like the idea, and I bet you there's a lot of Cardinals fans right now that saw this and said, hey, Emerson Hancock, let's go get him. I just don't think you have the right-handed bat to go get it. Exactly. If they were looking for a lefty, I think the Cardinals could make a ton of sense in a deal like this, and you package it around Lars Nootbaar. If they're looking for a right-handed bat, though, I don't think it makes sense unless Ivan Herrera was a natural outfielder, and he's just not.
I would add it, but the tough part is I think the right-hand bat they're looking for is in the top of the order, not what I'm about to bring up. If Wynn was having a good year, I think that would be your connection, because Crawford's a free agent at the end of the year. They could maybe look at that and say, all right, Mason Wynn, he'll just be our shortstop of the future. Maybe we kind of platoon it. I don't know how exactly you'd go about it. Maybe Crawford slides over to second while you got Donovan that's injured, or third base. And you could look at that and they'd say, okay, we get our shortstop of the future and we give up a pitcher that's just kind of in a logjam. The problem is like Wynn's not carrying much. He carries defensive value. He's not helping a team like the Mariners who are looking for offensive upgrades.
And the other problem is if he was having a good offensive season, the Cardinals aren't trading him.
Exactly.
And certainly aren't trading him for Emerson Hancock. The deal then would be like a George Kirby, Brian Wu, Bryce Miller.
Yeah.
So that it just wouldn't have lined up there either. The Mariners lined up for a deal with the Cardinals. It was just the deal that has already taken place, and they're hoping that they can get Brendan Donovan back sooner rather than later.
Is when you read everything across the board on the market, it doesn't even sound like anybody's really looking for a left-handed bat. It's all right-handed bats that I keep hearing, which makes me think that Nootbaar is going to be sticking around here in St. Louis. Because typically I feel like we get to the deadline, it's like everybody's looking for a left-handed bat. But this year it's somehow flipped, I guess because all the good left-handed bats are gone and everybody's kind of filled up those holes. This year it's right-handed bats, and there's just nobody on the market that fits that.
Congratulations, Nelson Velasquez. You are going to be a sought-after commodity at this year's trade deadline. I really think he might be a guy that ends up getting dealt. I think there's going to be value there. It's not going to get you a ton, but I think you're going to get a lottery ticket type of a prospect for Nelson Velasquez as somebody that can come off of the bench and provide some power against left-handed pitching in a playoff series for a legitimate contender. And if you do, by the way, good on Chaim Bloom. Made a very low-risk signing, added him to the roster, added him at the exact right time, and helps the Cardinals get a couple of wins at one point. And if you get a lottery ticket prospect at the deadline, mission accomplished. That's what this season was all about, is adding low-risk guys in the offseason, flipping them at the trade deadline. And if you're able to win a few games in the process, great. And that's exactly what they've done so far. All right, coming up on the other side, speaking of that offense, boy, it's gone cold lately. What is this a reflection of? What has happened to the Cardinals offense? Is it more about the core, or does it maybe say something about where they play? We'll talk about that coming up next here on the Redbird Report. The Cardinals offense has gone cold. We've all seen that. Bernie Miklasz had the numbers the other day. I'll give him credit. If you're looking at any of the alphabet soup numbers, batting average, WRC plus, OPS plus, all that stuff, bottom 5 offense in Major League Baseball for the last month. You don't need the exact numbers. Just no, they've been terrible. In most of those numbers, literally the worst offense in Major League Baseball. T-Bone, I do wonder, because I think there's been some frustration about this, certainly, and some concern, I would say, from others about what this means big picture, because Ivan Herrera has gone totally cold. In the last month, he's batting 165 with basically no power. JJ Weatherholt has come back to the pack a little bit over the last month as well, when he's batting 215, also has not shown a whole lot of power. You've seen Mason Wynn revert back to what he was a couple of years ago, where it just has not looked good for him at the plate. And then Nathan Church has become a complete pumpkin. He's batting 125 over the last month as well. Does this say anything about the core? We had said so long, hey, you've got a core four right now, JJ, Herrera, Walker, Burleson. Those guys are awesome. Throw Mason Wynn into the mix. He's a really good shortstop, even if offensively it's been a disappointing year relative to expectations or relative to hopes. Has that changed at all for you based upon the regression that we've seen offensively over the last month?
I am starting to raise some questions on Ivan Herrera because, like, you look at his numbers, it's not like this is a classic peek under the hood and, oh, everything's going to be fine, right? I mean, we're talking about a guy that suddenly just isn't driving the baseball. I mean, you look back at what his percentiles were last year, for example, if you go to Baseball Savant. Average exit velo, he was in the 78th percentile. Barrel percentage, 68th percentile. Hard hit percentage, 79th percentile. Now we fast forward to this year, average exit velo all the way down to 43rd percentile. Barrel percentage, 25th percentile. Hard hit percentage, 40th percentile. That's part of the reason for the struggle. He's just not driving the baseball, right? And that's why you're seeing the lack of power that we've seen. He was getting on base. I still think he's got a good batter's eye to where, like, I think that'll be fine. But if we're talking about a guy that's going to be a part of the core four that we were talking about, we were talking about a guy that was slugging at that time in Ivan Herrera. And I don't know if this is just, hey, the first full season for him at the major league level is finally starting to catch up to him because he's been healthy all season, or if there is just something else that's going on where baseball has figured him out, because we see this happen a lot with guys where it's just a snap of the finger and it's like gone and you don't really know what happened. But he's the one that I'm starting to have some questions on. Otherwise, like Weatherholt, he's going to be fine. Jordan Walker's a stud. Alec Burleson's a stud. Herrera's the one that for the first time I'm starting to look at and go, okay, this is weird, and this is a very long stretch where he has not been hitting. This isn't a 2-week stretch and he's figured it out. This has been going on for a while, and he's kind of, I hate to pinpoint it on one guy, he's kind of the reason that they are starting to fall apart because he's been the one guy that just hasn't been able to get it going.
I'm going to read you two separate numbers, okay? I'll call it player A and player B.
All right.
Player A has a 205 batting average and a 650 OPS.
Okay.
Player B has a 280 batting average and an 815 OPS. Okay?
Okay.
Can you guess who those players are? Based upon no other context?
I don't even, it's like one of those pies.
Basically what it is, yeah. Player A, the 205 average and the 650 OPS, that is Ivan Herrera at home. Player B, the 280 average and the 815 OPS, that is Ivan Herrera on the road this season. And that is representative of what the Cardinals have been this year. The Cardinals have been so bad at home, and I can't totally explain this one for you, T-Bone. And I looked into the numbers a little further. It's either bad luck or just symbolic of what Busch Stadium has become, which is they are, by the batted ball metrics, I don't want to get too nerdy for you, but just trust me on this. I promise I've got the numbers to back it. By the batted ball metrics, they are basically hitting the ball the same at home as they are on the road. But their numbers are 30 points lower on batting average, on slugging percentage, OPS, all of that stuff at home compared to on the road. And if you look into the StatCast numbers, they say Busch Stadium is literally in 2026 the worst home run hitting ballpark in Major League Baseball. And specifically what it suppresses most is home run hitting power for righties like Ivan Herrera, just to use him as the example here, since that was kind of the jumping off point for our conversation. I wonder if what we're witnessing is a reflection of what Busch Stadium has become, where it is just really freaking hard to hit at Busch, especially for power. Now, it shouldn't be this hard to hit doubles there, and Ivan Herrera has not done a good enough job, in my opinion, of hitting doubles this season. I think part of what you're seeing is he's just going through a huge slump, right? This is not all based upon him playing at Busch. They haven't been at Busch really in the second half of the season, and he's been terrible to start things out. So this is not explaining away everything. Some of this is he's going through a slump. But I do wonder if part of the offensive struggles have a lot to do with where they play all of their home games.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of those numbers because, I agree that, just watching the games, it feels like Busch does play as more of a pitcher-friendly ballpark. But, park factors that we talk about, these things seem to fluctuate, and a lot of it is just do you have the talent, right? Like if Judge were here, I don't think we'd be having a conversation about like Judge lacking power at Busch Stadium. Now that would be a real ballpark factor because like we were looking at it in San Diego like 2 years ago, they were one of the best ballparks to hit at, and now they're one of the worst ballparks to hit at. And I think a big driving force of that is their guys can't hit it anymore, period. It's not the ballpark. It's Manny Machado's old, can't hit. Tatis, for whatever reason, screwed up his swing. And I don't know what to make of Jackson Merrill struggles. So I don't know what to make of those numbers. But I think the key point that you point out with Herrera is they've been on the road for a decent amount here in the second half. So that's why it doesn't necessarily explain his long slump. That is just a guy that is really going through it. But you're right on what you said, though, about the doubles, about the ballpark. Like, okay, maybe this isn't a home run hitter's ballpark. So you should be hitting doubles, right? I mean, we've talked about this on the show before of Weatherholt not driving the ball like you would expect to hit doubles. Mason Wynn doesn't have the doubles I was thinking he was going to have. Ivan Herrera doesn't have the doubles that I thought he was going to have. And for Wynn and Herrera, it's their average exit velo, right? They're just not hitting the ball hard. And that's nothing to do with the ballpark, in my opinion. That's something with their swing. So I do think the ballpark plays somewhat of a factor in this. I think it's mostly just what the guys are doing at the plate than it is, well, the ballpark is really suppressing everything, and this explains why the offense can't hit there at home.
Cardinals at home have a 366 slugging percentage. Opponents at Busch Stadium have a 370 slugging percentage. And that's going up against the Cardinals pitching staff. So think about that for a second. Think about how bad the Cardinals pitching staff has been so far this year. And now imagine every other team in Major League Baseball is going up against them. And we think they're like a bottom 10 pitching staff in baseball?
Yeah.
And they have a top 10 slugging percentage against at home. That doesn't make sense to me, man. It doesn't, like, just by thinking about who the personnel is for the Cardinals, and it's not as though they've gone up against a bunch of terrible teams while they've been at home. They've gone up against really good lineups, and even against some of those lineups, yeah, they're giving up singles, but they're not giving up power at home. And then they go on the road and it's different. So I can't explain it, man. It's super weird. And I do think it's something to take into consideration. It doesn't explain away all of it. Herrera's going through a slump. That's problematic. But I do think some of this is we might have to change some of our feel of what these like solid hitters are, not named Jordan Walker, when they're at Busch Stadium or when they're on the St. Louis Cardinals. The same way that I think the Mariners have had to change their perspective on it. We're like, a really good hitter for the Mariners might hit 20 to 25 home runs in a season. And then occasionally you get a guy that goes crazy, right? Aaron Judge, if he played in Seattle, that guy would still hit 40 plus home runs because it's Aaron Judge. But what's different is at Yankee Stadium or if you go down to Houston, just to use those two stadiums as an example, you can get a mediocre hitter that hits the ball hard and they can finish with 30 home runs. At Busch Stadium, you can't get away with that. You have to be Jordan Walker, who hits rockets every time that it comes off of his bat in order to get to that level of power. And Herrera is more of a line drive hitter, so I think that reflects kind of why he maybe has some home run struggles when he's at home. The doubles, though, he should still be a better doubles hitter.
Yeah. And I think that's why you're kind of seeing, like, I would say Heim's main focus, or not, I would say it is, his main focus now is on the pitching side. I think Heim kind of sees how the ballpark plays. And you mentioned Seattle. They're the one that I would point to and say, Seattle knows what they're doing. They realize it's not a hitter-friendly ballpark, so they know that they have to be really good pitching-wise and then hope that a hitter will break out, right? And then, of course, what did Cal Raleigh do? Cal Raleigh had one of those incredible seasons we're talking about where he hit 60 home runs last year. That's why I never really understood what the Giants were doing in their build, right? They didn't really build around pitching. They built around offense. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Willie Adames isn't going to hit 35 home runs in San Francisco. The ball doesn't fly there. The ball flies in Milwaukee. Same when they acquired Chris Bryant that one year at the deadline. I'm like, I don't see this going well. But again, I like the doubles thing is the one where that's where I would like push back on the whole ballpark factor thing. Sure, we can talk about home runs, but when I say slug baby slug, I don't say home runs are the thing that win the game. It's the damage, right? And you can still do some pretty solid damage without being a great home run hitting team. Look at Milwaukee, for example. They are one of the worst teams in hitting home runs. They hit a crap ton of doubles at that ballpark, and look at where they are. They're one of the best teams in Major League Baseball.
All right, before we get out of this and talk a little bit about Ramon Urias and how he fits into the mix. By the way, apparently he's back. We'll talk about that here in just a minute.
Exciting.
I just saw this. This comes from Jim Bowden. So Ken Rosenthal tweeted yesterday, there are 8 teams on Kevin Gausman's no-trade list. So he can block a trade to the Reds, the Brewers, the Tigers, the Mets, the A's, the White Sox, and then the Pirates and the Mariners. Ken says most teams likely to be interested are free to acquire him without restriction. Jim Bowden quote tweeted that and said, "This leaves the Cubs, Padres, Braves, and Cardinals as the most likely landing spots if Kevin Gausman were to be dealt." Does Kevin Gausman make sense for the Cardinals?
My initial reaction is no, because he's a
UFA after the season and he's 35 years old.
Yeah, and I think he's a guy. I mean, if you're just buying on the margins, he makes sense. But again, other reports have said like they're seeking controllable arms.
I love Kevin Gausman, so I'm predisposed to saying like, yeah, go trade for him. But that seems like a weird path if you're not going for it.
Yeah, if you're kind of selling, if you're like threading the needle, he doesn't even make sense to me, right? If you're buying, like this would have to be like you're truly buying. Like this is why I would bring up Robbie Ray when we were talking like 3 weeks ago when things were sunshine and lollipops and they were buyers.
Unless there's nobody that values Kevin Gausman and they're just willing to take a total lottery ticket, in which case, like, sure, yeah, I'll go ahead and give you a lottery ticket for Kevin Gausman for the rest of the season. And then maybe he decides he loves pitching in St. Louis, where they have the hardest ballpark in America to hit a home run at, and he just wants to stick around for another year. And then the Cardinals basically do with Kevin Gausman next year what they did this year with Dustin May. Like, I guess I could see that scenario, but that's really the only path that I can muster up that would make sense in this scenario. I feel like the Cubs, Padres, and Braves make a whole lot more sense.
Yeah, I agree. And
Cardinals feel like a weird team to include in that list.
I feel like we're being thrown in as leverage. That's what I feel like we're being thrown in there for. Yeah, again, like the other thing is that's a bidding war right there, right? Like that's not a, hey, we're the only ones that called about Gausman. Sure, give us a lottery ticket. That's, well, the Cubs are offering this, the Padres are offering this, the Braves are offering that. Are you really going to get into a bidding war for a 35-year-old rental who has a 4.51 ERA in his 21 starts this year? I mean, his metrics are good. Like he's 9.1 strikeouts per nine, 2.6 walks per nine. That is the kind of guy that I would love to target. I don't think he makes much sense for that because I don't see them being true buyers, and he doesn't make sense if you're like trading May and then you bring him. I don't understand why they would do that move.
Doesn't make a ton of sense, but whatever. It's silly season. Why try to make sense of things when there's a fun player that could potentially be heading to your team? We can just throw caution at the wind and, hey, Kevin Gausman, congratulations, you're a new Cardinal. I'm here for it. It just seems like a very strange decision for this year's trade deadline. So wanted to throw that out there. Thought it was interesting that Jim Bowden included them on the list. I would go ahead and say I don't think he's going to be a Cardinal. Coming up on the other side, we'll project forward. What does the next week mean for the St. Louis Cardinals prior to our next conversation here on BK and Ferrario? And is Ramon Urias going to be on the team by the time we get back to the deadline? We'll talk about that next here on the Redbird Report. So Ramon Urias, he's not back with the Cardinals, but he is back with the Memphis Redbirds. He's off to begin a rehab assignment starting this weekend. That's according to Jeff Jones of the Belleville News-Democrat. T-Bone, I liked what Ramon Urias had done for the Cardinals prior to the injuries, and I say injuries plural because there have been multiple of them, apparently to both elbows, I guess, this season. How do you think he fits into their plans? Like, what's his future hold here in St. Louis?
Well, I think he's probably your starting third baseman in the second half then, because I could see a situation where if they're in it, they're going to play their best lineup in the second half, and I think he's your best third base option. Now, I don't know what you do with Blaze. Like maybe you platoon Blaze with Burleson if he continues to struggle against left-handed pitching. But I think Ramon Urias, when he gets back here, will be the starting third baseman for the Cardinals.
I like that we have differing perspectives on this. I think he's traded. How many times have we said teams need right-handed bats at this year's trade deadline? Guess what Ramon Urias is? A right-handed bat. And guess what he does? Absolutely crush left-handed pitching. He is not a great player, but he does one thing really well. He's really good against lefties. That's basically always been his role. And with the Cardinals this year, that's been no different. He's been quite good against lefties in his limited sample size of being available at the big league level. Now, you're not going to get a ton for him, but kind of similar to what I said about Nelson Velazquez. Maybe you trade Velazquez one place and he gets you a lottery ticket prospect. You trade Ramon Urias a different place, he gets you another lottery ticket prospect. And in the end, I trust in Chaim Bloom to go get a guy that can really help you. You look at some of the packages that he was able to get in the offseason, whether that's for Brendan Donovan or for Wilson Contreras or Sonny Gray. All of those guys that he's been able to get in return for the most part have shown legitimate promise in the Cardinals minor league system so far this year. So I think Ramon Urias ends up getting dealt at this year's deadline. The timing really couldn't be any better because you'll be able to get something pretty close to a full rehab stint prior to the trade deadline.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would bet that he would be here because I don't know that a team's going to... I get what you're saying about the lack of right-handed options. He is good defensively, as we saw when he was healthy for the Cardinals. But with him missing so much time, I don't know if he can prove enough in a rehab assignment.
You mean like when Tommy Edman was on the injured list last year or when Harrison Bader was on the injured list a couple of years ago?
Sure, but those are better players, too, to be fair. Like Ramon Urias, we're talking about a guy with a 69 OPS plus. Now, yes, he was good against
That's all
lefties.
against righties, though,
Sure,
which is not going to be his role elsewhere.
But I just think Bader and Edman were just better, flat out better players.
I agree.
So that's why I think they are different. Same with it's a different position, but we saw that with Shane Bieber too, right? I mean, Bieber was traded to Toronto last year in the midst of coming back from Tommy John surgery, I think it was, and it was on the rehab assignment. I just don't know if he's going to be valued across the league enough to be traded. I could be wrong, and I'm open to that. Because, we got traded last year at the deadline as a basically defense first option. But with him missing so much time, I don't know if teams are going to be willing to give up a lottery ticket for him.
I think that he'll get moved, but either way, it's nice to see him back on the field because he's a guy that I think they did have real plans for this season, and it just obviously has not worked out from a health perspective. I think it's possible that if they do keep him around, he may be back next year, too. They don't have any other third base options currently in the system, so you have to weigh that as part of this as well, where maybe he says, hey, I've really enjoyed my time with the Cardinals, but it's been relatively brief, and maybe he's somebody that they can just bring back and use him as a placeholder while they still continue to work some of these guys through their minor league system on the infield.
And he's got a mutual option. I'm sure it's like $3 million. There's no way it's a ton of money, I wouldn't think. So, yeah, that's the other reason for me is I could totally see him being back here next year as the starting third baseman on opening day.
Yeah, it would make a lot of sense. Mutual option, $4 million for Ramon Urias next year. You could, and I don't think he's going to opt out.
No.
I don't think he's getting more than that elsewhere right now. So from his perspective, it makes sense. And from the Cardinals' perspective, I'm not sure you're upgrading from him for $4 million and whatever. It's $4 million. They don't have any cap issues or any kind of payroll issues. So yeah, I could see that too. You've got to weigh those two things of what makes more sense for you. Does it make more sense to get the lottery ticket prospect or to have Ramon Urias potentially back on a $4 million contract? All right, before we get out of here, T-Bone, Cardinals over the next week have one game later on this afternoon here in just a moment against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Then they'll play 3 this weekend against a terrible Cincinnati Reds team before finishing things up with a series against the Chicago Cubs. Over that stretch, they will play 8 games prior to us having another conversation. How you feeling going into this stretch?
I'd like to say I'm feeling good, but I'm not. I don't like the way they're trending as they get ready to take on the Cubs, the one game against the Diamondbacks that will be played here in a little bit as we're recording this. And then, as much as I want to say, yeah, they'll take 2 or 3 from the Reds. The Reds are telling anybody that'll listen, they're sellers. They just lost 2 or 3 at the Angels. So I don't feel great. I think they drop 3 or 4 to the Cubs. I think they will take 2 or 3 ultimately from the Reds, and they'll lose this game to the Diamondbacks. So I think that's, by the time we come on next Thursday, we're going to officially know that they're probably sellers, and I'm assuming somebody's going to start to run away with this wild card race.
You should be in a pretty good spot when it comes to your pitching. You should have some pitching advantages over these teams that you're about to go up against. Yeah, you got to go up against Green. That's not going to be an easy one. But beyond that, man, the Cubs have some pretty rough pitching going right now. They do have a good offense, but they're playing at Busch Stadium, and as we've talked about, it's impossible to hit at Busch Stadium this season. So I'll say they end up doing the thing that we're all going to be super annoyed by. And over this 8-game stretch, they go 5-3. And they put you into the exact worst possible scenario if you're in Chaim Bloom's shoes, where now you're 57 and 44. So you're a few games above 500. You're probably still right in the mix for a potential playoff spot. You just took, let's say it's 3 of 4 against the Cubs. And so direct head-to-head against one of the teams that's competing for one of those wild card spots against you, you looked better than them. Like, that's going to be a nightmare scenario for this team to figure out what they're going to do. And maybe they win today against the Arizona Diamondbacks and boom, you like lose 2 out of 3 against the Reds, win the series against the Cubs, win the game against the Diamondbacks, and you just have no idea what to do with this team.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Because like even now, as much as we're talking about like, boy, it feels like the sky is falling and man, they are true sellers. And then you look at the standings and you go, wait, they're only a half a game back of the Diamondbacks as we record this. And if they win this game, guess what? They will be in the playoff picture by Friday morning when you wake up. So for as bad as they have played of late, nobody in this wild card race is playing good baseball right now, which is making everything tough on all of these front offices.
By the way, among wild card contenders in the National League, where do you think the Cardinals rank in runs allowed?
Runs allowed. It's a BK game. I'll say, are they the third worst?
Second best.
Really?
Second best. Yeah, how about that?
Well, to be fair, the Nationals pitching's awful.
This pitching's terrible. Shoot all of these guys into the second best. Second best in run suppression among National League wildcard contenders. Meanwhile, the offense, hey, they found their core. Jordan Walker MVP. Fourth worst. It's crazy.
Run differential at 0.
What a weird year this has been for the St. Louis Cardinals. It's been fun to cover. We'll continue doing so here on the Redbird Report. If you haven't done so yet, be sure to check us out on YouTube at youtube.com/101ESPNSTL. You can subscribe to the podcast over there. You can also subscribe to the audio forms wherever it is that you prefer to listen to your podcast. We do this each and every Thursday. Appreciate you tuning in as always. And if you're interested, we do have some new packages for sales that have come available for us here on the show. Reach out to myself or Tanner Hendrickson. We'd love to tell you a little bit about it, how we can become partners with you here on the Redbird Report. So for Tanner Hendrickson and for Noah on the video side of things, I'm Brandon Kiley. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll talk to you next week here on the Redbird Report.
Find every episode of the Redbird Report with Brandon Kiley and Tanner Hendrickson on YouTube or at 101ESPN.com.